This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Donald Trump says it will be Europe, not America, making security guarantees for Ukraine.
I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that because it's we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor.
Volodymyr Zelensky claims getting a commitment that Ukraine will be protected against further Russian aggression in any lasting ceasefire is key to a minerals deal being done. The US president sees the right to Ukraine's rare earth materials as compensation for military aid. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer will meet Donald Trump tomorrow. 7 companies will be investigated over the Grenfell Tower fire, which killed 72 people in West London in 2017. Housing Secretary Angela Rayner has formally accepted the findings of an inquiry in the Commons this afternoon. A former Olympic swimmer has been jailed for more than 20 years after he raped 2 teenage girls. 35-year-old Anthony James represented Team GB in the 100-metre butterfly at London 2012. He also won silver in the Commonwealth Games in 2010. And there's been a slight improvement in Pope Francis's health as he nears a 2-week stay in hospital for double pneumonia. The 88-year-old's kidney issues have also been resolved. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 62 points at 87.31. The pound by $1.26 and €1.20. LBC weather, lingering showers in coastal areas tonight, longer spells of rain for Wales, but drier in northeast Scotland and a low of -1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. On the panel with me, to my left, Yuan Labour MP for Earley and Woodley. Next to her, Robbie Moore, Conservative Shadow Farming Minister and MP for Keighley. To my right, James Schneider, former Labour Party Director of Strategic Communications under Jeremy Corbyn and co-founder of Momentum. Next to him, and on everybody's right, it's Gawain Towler. Oh, you're rejecting that description. Former advisor to Nigel Farage when he was leader of the 3 parties he's been leader of, UKIP, Brexit Party and Reform UK. They're here to answer your calls on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number and you can watch our proceedings on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Scott in West Hampstead. Scott, hi.
Hi, Ian. Good evening, panel. This is my question. How should Sir Keir Starmer handle his very important meeting tomorrow with Donald Trump? Should he try hard not to ruffle any feathers, or constructively challenge the president about Britain's position on key issues, including Ukraine and the Chagos Islands deal?
No, Yuan, I wouldn't normally come to a debutant first on the programme because I think it's cruel. But on this occasion, I'm going to make an exception because I think we all want to hear how you think the Prime Minister should handle this summit tomorrow.
Yeah, of course. Well, the first thing I'd say, it's really important that Keir Starmer is having this meeting with Donald Trump. The UK and the US have had historically very important partnership. And in many cases, I would say to Scott, UK interests and American interests are aligned, particularly when it comes to military and defence issues, particularly
well, they always have
NATO.
been, but nowadays it's sort of slightly more tricky, isn't it?
I think we have to do the work to make sure that that's a strong relationship, particularly when you consider the importance of NATO in guarding European interests and the importance of the US in Ukraine right now. So I think on those issues, I don't see a disalignment between US and UK interests. I think it's really, really important to European defence that the UK and the US have a very strong relationship.
But there are bound to be differences between the two of them. I suppose what lies behind Scott's question is how far should Keir Starmer go in acknowledging that there are differences between the two of them? I'm
sure that both of them would recognise that they have differences of opinion, differences in their politics. They're from different political parties. That's what you'd expect in a functioning democracy. It'd be very strange otherwise. And I think I would trust Keir Starmer to take the relationship seriously. And I think that's the really important basis for that, to say, we are different countries, we have our national interests, but we have a really joint common interest in European and global defence.
Because the media, being the media, will interpret this meeting and compare it to the one that Trump had with Macron on Monday, where there was a lot of knee touching going on. And I wonder, James, you've been in this situation where you've advised not a prime minister but a party leader, and I'm sure Jeremy Corbyn must have met one or two characters in the past that he would have really disagreed with. And what advice did you give him, and what advice would you give Keir Starmer?
Well, different ones with speaking to Trump, because I think Donald Trump only really respects if you're forceful with him. Look at who he respects and look who he treats terribly. He treats terribly allies, and he seems to respect Xi and Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. And I think what he respects is that they do state that we have divergent interest on some things and aligned interest on other things. So what I'd like to see from Keir Starmer, but we won't see, I'm sure we won't see, is to come forward and say, here is where Britain and the US have fundamentally really quite different interests. And I think we really do. And if you look at the course of foreign policy over the last 30 years, Britain has just followed in the US slipstream, and we're all the worse for it. We've had a huge number of terrible foreign policy catastrophes because we've followed what the US has done. So I'd like to see Keir Starmer say, we have different, of course we want to work with you on this, this and this, but we have some very large differences on other issues, and we will stand up for our interests. And I think that's not only going to be better for people in Britain, it's going to be better in the world, but long term it will build a better relationship with the United States.
Gawain.
I think, thinking of this alignment, this many years of alignment, you've got to remember we didn't go to war in Vietnam, despite the fact America was desperately keen for us to do so. Australia did, we didn't. And we do have the ability to say no to the US. That is,
which Margaret Thatcher did to Ronald Reagan over Grenada.
Yep. So
well, they'd already done it.
But that tradition of alliance is a helpful alliance, but it is not a necessary alliance. It is not all the time, every time. Personally, I'd like him to go over there and actually spend more time talking about a trade deal than talking about something where, whilst we can't put more than a division in the field, there's only so much we can do in Ukraine. And I think to America, and particularly to the Americans, foreign policy is not what they're interested in. The American people really aren't that interested in foreign policy. They're interested in what he's doing domestically. And so I think for Trump, it's a lot of complications and awkwardnesses, but it's not really his driver. His driver is at home. It's not foreign affairs. And in domestic affairs, he's doing a very good job.
Robbie Moore.
Well, I think it's the very nature of the Prime Minister's job is to stand up for the British interests, and alliance has been touched on, incredibly important, but that alliance is based on mutual respect for the strength of both leaders. So I hope that the Prime Minister's meeting tomorrow is one of British strength. No doubt it's frustrating that dare I say, it's relied almost on the President to put pressure on the UK to have a response in terms of increasing its defence spending. No doubt that will get raised. I'm sure Chagos will get raised as well, where there'll be a difference of opinion. I hope it is, and I hope that the Prime Minister listens very much to the US's positioning on that. But it is right that that this relationship that needs to be very much established as we go forward is one that is based on mutual respect for one another. Disappointing, actually, that this isn't the first leader from Europe that the president has met. It would have been nice to have seen Keir Starmer been out there first to have that relationship, but that's not happening.
You can't blame Keir Starmer for that, can you?
Well, I think
you'll have a good try.
I think it'd be nice if there had been that indication and willingness to have that relationship built straight from day one.
I think there's something. Macron, during Trump won, Macron welcomed Trump to Paris with parades and all sorts. Trump comes here and you've got parades of people shouting at him. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Trump invited Macron, because Macron has played that game very well. And he has been very welcoming to Trump. Well, the whole of Europe says, no. But actually, when it came down to it, Trump's visit to Paris was superb. And so therefore, and Trump remembers things. He does remember how he's been treated by people. So it doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
Well, it's going to be very interesting. This time tomorrow, we will know the result of this summit. There's a press conference which is timed for 7 p.m, but we all know what happens at these press conferences. So about 9:20, I would think. Right, you mentioned Robbie Chagos there. Well, there's a text question here from Alan in Shoebury-Ness. Does David Lammy admitting the Chagos deal won't happen without Trump's support, is that just the first step to a massive U-turn? Well, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has told ITV's Peston show that, and this is a quote, if President Trump doesn't like the deal will not go forward. And the reason for that is because we have a shared military and intelligence interest with the United States. And of course, they've got to be happy with the deal, or there is no deal. He added that he does still believe it is the best deal. Is the mother of all U-turns coming, Yuan?
I don't quite understand with due respect to Alan, I don't quite understand the premise of this question, because it is a UK-US joint military base. So I suppose you have to talk about.
It's not. As I understand it, and feel free for anyone to correct me, but we have sovereignty over the whole of the Chagos Islands.
Well, I think the question is whether that's actually practically the case.
Well, therefore, the Mauritian government under this deal would lease it back to us, and we then in turn lease it to the Americans. So, but I mean, what David Lammy has said tonight, we've known this all along. And yet, you have to admit, this is a change in tone.
So I suppose my point on this is given that the Americans and the British are doing a deal, of course both sides have to agree to the deal. I mean, I don't think that has changed. If I'm moving into a house, or if I'm renting my house to somebody else, they have to agree to the deal. So I don't really see how there's a difference in tone or in regard to
this is
sorry, James, let's go to
perhaps the Prime Minister needs to listen to your opinion as well, but this is British sovereign territory. There's been an arrangement that's been made very badly by this Prime Minister in effectively giving up the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands at a cost which we do not even know yet, because the government has not been open and transparent on this. Indeed, the only information that we seem to be able to get from costings is based from the Mauritius government, ranging somewhere between 9 billion, 18 billion, who knows, at the cost effectively.
Over 99 years.
Over a 99-year period. Yet there is no openness and transparency of what happens after 99 year has finished. This is a military base which has nuclear activity that is going from it, is absolutely key in its positioning in terms of protecting not only British sovereignty and British foreign interests, but also that of America, and that's where we have a strong relationship with America in being able to utilise that base. But also in terms of telecommunications, we rely on the Chagos Islands for its positioning where it is, as do the Americans. This is a bad arrangement, and I do not know why the Prime Minister is so keen on pursuing it when clearly the Americans don't want it, clearly the wider British public do not want this, and I don't know why the Prime Minister seems to be going down this route. And I do hope that when it comes to the discussions tomorrow in Washington, D.C., that President Trump also makes clear the US's position on this.
Well, he's going for it, presumably, because his Attorney General is one of his best friends, who's an international lawyer.
There are three key players in this.
Well, indeed.
Well, I feel like we've been very kind of forgetful about the actual history of this deal. The Conservative government, the previous government, started negotiating the deal almost 3 years ago in 2022 because there were legal questions raised about the ownership of the islands. And that made it impossible. You can't operate a military airbase when there are those questions in the air for the long term, for the next 99 years. And now that deal is dragged out over the last 2.5 years by the previous government, and what this government is doing is coming in and saying, look, we've got to be serious about this.
I think there's got to be some clarity that's just brought to this conversation. It's good to see that you're reading from the mindset of the whip handout notes that you've obviously been given. But the point here is, yes, there were conversations within the Foreign Office that took place.
If Kemi Badenoch was here, she'd say you're being very patronising, Robbie.
But clearly, the Labour MPs are towing the line in that.
Well, what's wrong with what I've said?
The line that's being towed.
Can you actually answer the point that I made?
There has been. Both of us have probably just come from the House of Commons chamber, where there's been a debate specifically on Chagos, where the Shadow Foreign Secretary, indeed many of the backbenchers on our side, who were previous ministers, have said that yes, there were conversations within the civil service, but there was no point at which any deal was even accepted within the Foreign Office.
I haven't said that there was a start.
So it was conversations previously.
Let's bring the other two in, James.
So the towing the line. And if we want to talk about the history, let's go back before the ICJ judgment of 2019.
wasn't a judgment, it was an opinion.
Advisory
So
opinion from the
yeah.
world's highest court in 2019. But let's go back a little bit, because we're seeing the same thing play out, which is us being a Mickey Mouse country and not being truly independent and being dominated by the US, and seemingly willfully so. In the late 1960s, the US wanted a military base in the Chagos Islands, in Diego Garcia. So the successive British governments cleared out the entire population of the island, including killing their pets, and took them thousands of miles away. That's the first point. That is a great wrong, a huge wrong, which should be undone and can be undone for the Chagossian people. That's the first point. The second, the second point, I want to come up about the cost, because we shouldn't have this military base. If we're worried about paying so much money to Mauritius, which under international law should have sovereignty over this territory.
Why? It has done.
Because it was an incomplete decolonisation. I mean, you can read the full judgment. We can argue about international law in 1 second.
But
I want to make
Mauritius has never been in charge of it. Never.
Please read the law, but we can come to the law and argue about it in a second. I want to make one more point about the military base, because we're paying all of this money to have a military base, which we don't need. It's the US's military base. If the US wants to have it, if they want to pay for it, they should pay Mauritius. We shouldn't. We shouldn't have the base. We should leave, and yes, we should pay reparations to the people who were expelled, who had their land taken away from them, who had their animals killed.
Those very same people want to stay British. They do not want to be Mauritian. And that has to surely be taken into account as well.
And if they say they're Chagossian and they happen to be Mauritians, they get banged up for 10 years. This is not a friendly nation.
There is a long-standing campaign by the Chagossians to go home, which is what should happen. That's one set of things. That's what should happen. They should be allowed to go home, and they should be given money to rebuild their homeland, which was taken away from them by a disgusting act, a criminal act by the British and the US American states. That's the first point. The second point is to do with the question of international law. And the reason why the Conservative government were working on this, and the reason why Keir Starmer's government has done it, is in order to protect the US military base. And my point is, we shouldn't be protecting the US military base. We have no interest in that whatsoever.
The idea that we don't have interest in an American military base in the middle of the Indian Ocean as part of the Five Eyes agreement, that's mad. Of course we have an interest in a military base there, and it is sovereign territory. This idea that it's more secure as a lease as opposed to a freehold seems to be, it's for the birds. Now,
it's not our land.
I agree with you.
It's not our land.
Hold on.
It's not ours.
It is ours.
It's not ours.
It literally is.
It
literally
isn't. It was taken from someone else.
The fact that you're having this debate shows it's important to have a deal done, so we can have clarity about the terms on which it operates.
I think they've been treated appallingly, abominably over the years, and they should, and they're still being treated abominably. They're not being brought into the room. Starmer hasn't brought them into the room. Nobody's brought them into the room, and their say should be very important. I absolutely agree with you.
I'm not defending a deal. I'm not defending a deal which has been done for the US. The reason why the predecessor foreign secretaries from the Conservative government were working on this deal is in order to protect the US from the threat of legal ramifications to the fact that the world's highest court had issued an advice. So, for example, some people did not want to do business with the base anymore because of its potentially illegal status. Anyway, that's what the discussions that were taking place between the Biden State Department and the British Foreign Office. That's why the deal was done. Now, I'm not supportive of the deal in order to protect the base. I want justice done for the Chagossians who had a crime against humanity done to them.
Okay, right. We've had a good bash at that. We could spend another 10 minutes talking about it. We've got lots of other questions to come. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:20 here on LBC. We have a very lively panel tonight. Gawain Towler is with us. I just said to Gawain, I've been pronouncing his name wrong for 10 years, and he said, yes, you have. Well, I just thought Towler, but anyway.
As I say, bowler hat.
Exactly.
Fast bowler.
Yuan Yang, I'm pronouncing your name right,
You
I
are.
hope. Excellent. Labour MP for Earley and Woodley, which is near Reading.
Which is
I
in
think.
Reading.
In
Yes,
Reading.
that's right. Yeah.
And you've got a bit of a campaign, and I've been following the financial fortunes of Reading Football Club. I listen to the Price of Football podcast each week, and they've been talking about this for years. Now, you've got a debate on this in the Commons. A minute, what's it all about?
So the debate we've got is about the financial sustainability and governance of football. In short, it is not sustainable. The governance is bad. And that's why we needed an independent football regulator. But I think this really matters so much for fans of clubs like mine, which have suffered because of absent owners or financial mismanagement, or all those things combined. And that's why Reading Football Club's fortunes have, as you know, have been on a roller coaster over the last 5 years of its ownership drama. And now, this is not an isolated example. We had a huge number of different backbench MPs from different parties sign onto the backbench debate that I'm bringing to Parliament next Thursday. And I think that's because wherever you are across the country, in towns and cities, your local clubs, if they're not in the Premier League, if they're in the English Football League, or if they're even out of the leagues, are suffering financially more likely than not. And the NGO Fair Game estimates that over half of the top 92 clubs are insolvent technically. And the reasons behind that are myriad, but I think it speaks to the breakdown of the whole football pyramid. And it's in the interests of everyone, from the very top to the very bottom, that that pyramid is supported throughout and that it's sustainable financially.
I saw a remarkable statistic recently. I think it was Kieran Maguire on the Price of Football podcast. He said that in many clubs in the Championship, for every £100 they're bringing in revenue, they're spending £101 on wages. That's ignoring all the other costs. And I mean, that is not sustainable. I mean, there are so many clubs living beyond their means, but in Reading's case, it goes way beyond that. I mean, financial mismanagement, I better be careful what I say, but all power to your elbow on that. Robbie Moore is here, Conservative Shadow Farming Minister and MP for Keighley. So no football clubs in Keighley?
We have a few.
Not professional
We have
ones.
a few. But the point that has just been made, it absolutely resonates across. I'm sure all of us have got grassroots football clubs that are absolutely struggling, and indeed those that are a little bit higher up in the league tables that want to be able to progress, but just because of the financial overheads, it's incredibly challenging. So, so the debate next Thursday will be, I'm sure, one that is fully supported, I suspect, in terms of its numbers.
Right, let's take a text question from Tommy in Horsham. He says, as I see it, Ukraine is signing away its minerals and in return getting no security guarantees from America and being told to forget about ever joining NATO. Why should Zelensky even consider signing this agreement with Trump on Friday? Now, Donald Trump has said that his Ukrainian counterpart will be heading to Washington to sign the deal on Friday, saying that the US, quotes, are going to get our money back. Where have I heard that before? And we're going to get a lot of money in the future. Ukraine's government formally approved the draft agreement within the last hour. Well, we don't know what the terms of this agreement are, but it does seem strange that Zelensky would sign something without any security guarantees. Gawain, let's start with you.
I do think if America is accessing this mineral wealth, which I think believes that is the case, it does mean their economic interest is now tied to Ukraine. And I think, though we haven't seen the details, but I think there is almost a security guarantee because it is so valuable. So up until now, America hasn't had that direct interest in the Ukraine and therefore hasn't had that same level of support for Ukraine against Russia. So actually this deal, though it might sound a bit weird, will create a situation where the Americans have a direct financial economic interest in the Ukraine, and it will create wealth for the Ukraine as well as America.
But isn't
so?
Well, Zelensky was saying a few days ago that he wasn't going to mortgage the future of 10 generations of Ukrainians.
Yes.
So maybe settle for 3.
He's lost the future of hundreds of thousands
won't this
Ukrainians,
feed all the conspiracy theorists who think that America only ever gets involved in military action when there's an oil interest or an energy interest? I mean, this kind of proves them right, doesn't it?
Yes. It's their interest. He's not been elected president of the world. He's not been elected president of Britain. He's not been elected president of the Ukraine. He's been elected the president of the United States.
And if America's getting its money back, what about us?
It's the art of the deal, isn't it? We've not asked for it. We've not wanted it. I was talking to a chap who left the army about 4 years ago, and he couldn't believe, but it is the case, that his tank is somewhere north of Kiev. We gave these tanks away. These are expensive pieces of kit. Now, there are reasons why, yes, but you're dealing with an American president who's working for American interests, not ours.
James?
I think Ukraine has been done he probably has to accept the deal because there's a barrel of the gun to his head from Trump, and Ukraine is going to have a double dismemberment, one of its wealth to the US and the other to territory to Russia. And for years, Ukraine was led up the garden path that you can join NATO, you can take this hostile approach towards Russia, whether it was right or wrong for the people of Ukraine. That was never genuinely on offer. They were never genuinely going to be given what they were promised. And this was used in part geopolitically against Russia. And then Russia invaded them, have taken their territory, and now, as you say, their future has been mortgaged. It's a double horror that's been inflicted upon them. I don't know what way out they have from it.
Robbie?
Well, President Trump was absolutely elected on the basis of standing up for American interests. And we all know that he has a different way of negotiating. He will go in very strong, as he has done on many of the different, not just with Ukraine, but we've also seen in the Middle East a differing stance. What's really interesting about this is he's obviously positioned himself as America to make sure that they have some sort of economic interest absolutely at the heart of Ukraine. We don't know what the detail of the negotiation is that's been agreed, but he, I suspect, will be wanting to demonstrate to his fellow Americans that it's fine if we're going to continue giving the level of support that Ukraine is wanting, but you will only have this level of support guaranteed if you have some sort of stake in the game. And I suspect that is the position. That's obviously the position that he's taken, and I suspect that is politically going to be welcomed by the American people. Now, what will be interesting to see is how this absolutely plays out with the wider European partners and their European positioning. We've seen the position that we've taken as a country now with defence spending increasing, but Trump will definitely be wanting to prove to his fellow Americans that now that they have potentially, based on the deal which we assume has been agreed, a financial interest in the game, that's a way of him justifying any ongoing military support.
Yuan?
I just want to zoom out and underline that there's huge support, cross-party support in Parliament for the Ukrainian people. There's huge support I see across my constituency in Earley and Woodley, and I'm sure across many others in the UK, and that we provide support to Ukraine because it's the right thing to do. That's separate to the points that I think you and others raised earlier about getting money back or out. And I don't think that's the right way of looking at this issue, and I don't think that's how most British people would look at the issue. We support Ukraine because it's the right thing to do. As for this agreement, obviously, as you said, Iain, we don't know the details of the agreement. President Zelensky is a democratically elected leader. Very much see him as the legitimate leader of the Ukrainian people on this issue, and that it's up to him to decide what's right.
But what about the NATO membership issue? I mean, is that now off the table, do you think?
Well, Zelensky has, and I think quite nobly, several times, as you know, offered to step down in return for NATO membership. I think that's how seriously he and Ukraine takes it. That has to be a consensual decision among all the NATO members.
But Keir Starmer is on record as saying that Ukraine is on an irreversible path towards joining NATO. He said that less than a fortnight ago. Now, was that just naivety on his part?
I would like to see Ukraine reach the end of that that path, but NATO is the coalition of members, and so, as I said, it has to be a decision among a consensus decision.
Let's just have a brief follow-up question from Colin, who says, is the PM right to suggest that Nigel Farage and his Reform UK party fawn over Putin? Gawain Towler?
No.
But he has fawned over Putin in the past.
No, he hasn't.
I've seen him do it.
He hasn't fawned over Putin. I think it was
he's
many
been
years
quite
ago.
pro-Putin in some ways.
No, he was the famous time when he was asked about what were your most impressive global leader. He was saying Putin was doing something for the Russian people. So he admired that aspect of doing something for the Russians, as he admires Trump doing something for the American people, as he also admires Zelensky for doing things for the Ukrainian people. What he was pointing out was the British Prime Minister at the time was not doing things for the British people. That's what that was about. It wasn't fawning, and that's, I think, is.
But he was also quite soft about Trump's describing Zelensky as a dictator.
I didn't actually know. He said absolutely the opposite when he was questioned by Sky in America last week. Completely the opposite.
But he was saying that they should have elections as soon as possible, sort of echoing Trump.
Down the line, yes. And they will do.
Well, he didn't say down the line.
But I mean, he literally said he did not believe that Zelensky was a dictator. So that's wrong. That's just the wrong way round. 180 degrees wrong. So it's just not the case. Now, a politician attacking an opponent politician and overstating their case is not uncommon. I understand I'm not on the far right of this table, but I'm also dangerous.
Are you?
Yes, I'm dangerously right-wing, according to Mr. Starmer, or Sir Keir. At the same time he was making the speech about
never
Ukraine.
Regarded you as dangerous.
Well, precisely.
Right.
I don't regard myself as particularly dangerous, but I am dangerously right-wing, it is.
Okay.
So,
right, brief comment from the other three, Yuan.
I mean, I think possibly where Colin's question comes from is that it is very difficult to tell for the average voter what Nigel Farage and the Reform MPs in Parliament think about Russia, what they actually think about foreign policy, because they flip-flop all the time.
Well,
and the messages that they send.
Tice went out to Ukraine, paid a lot of money to take stuff out there. He took medicines and all the rest a couple of years ago. So Tice has been very, very supportive of Ukraine.
And you can pick out individual members, but then Farage himself...
Well, he's the deputy leader.
Well, as we were saying, Farage,
at the time, he was the leader of the party.
Will go back and forth about what he's saying about dictators and so on. And I think this just shows how unserious Farage really is as a leader. Foreign policy and national defence is an important part of what a government does. I think you could consider that it's the fundamental part of what a government does, but I wouldn't trust somebody like Farage in charge of national defence, and that I think is one of the fundamental issues with the Reform MPs.
Robbie.
Well, again, Reform's policy on this is unknown, I think. Each of all of the Reform MP members certainly seem to be coming from a different stance, and if they don't agree with Farage, it seems to be that it's very uncomfortable for them to even form a single united voice on this, if it's not what Nigel Farage effectively says. But I think we're all united, particularly most of us as members of Parliament, in that Putin cannot be trusted. This is an individual who carried out an illegal evasion
Trump
against...
thinks he can. That's the problem, isn't it?
But he cannot. This is an individual we can't.
Well,
and that's a very clear message that's coming from the United Kingdom.
James.
I haven't seen enough of the fawning, and if there is fawning, there shouldn't be. But I'm more concerned about the alliances with Giorgia Meloni and Viktor Orban, and indeed Donald Trump, all of whom I think are antithetical to our interests.
Okay, final word from Ukraine.
Not much I've to add, actually.
Okay, I thought you wanted to come in. Okay, right, let's go to the news. Dara Jackson has the LBC News headlines at 8:33.
Ukraine has agreed a deal to give the US access to its rare minerals, but President Zelensky says they're yet to agree security guarantees. Donald Trump claims the agreement will mean US taxpayers get their money back. Cladding and insulation companies are among those which will be investigated following the Grenfell Tower fire. The government has formally accepted the recommendations of an inquiry into the tragedy which killed 72 people in June 2017. And a man's been in court charged with causing the death of a 3-year-old girl who was killed in Manchester. A van and a tram crashed on Saturday. LBC weather, lingering showers in coastal areas tonight. Longer spells of rain for Wales, but drier in northeast Scotland and a low of -1.
This is LBC.
Did you
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
This is letter today.
8:36. You're listening to or watching Cross Question. Gawain, Towler, former advisor to Nigel Farage, is here. Yuan, Labour MP for Earley and Woodley. Robbie Moore, Conservative Shadow Farming Minister and MP for Keighley. And James Schneider, former Labour Party Director of Strategic Communications under Jeremy Corbyn. Now, briefly, I understand from reading Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogren's book that you had dinner with Dominic Cummings.
I did, yeah.
Spill.
It was during the Brexit wars in 2019, and we had a very enjoyable dinner, and he was trying to encourage us to find a way for some kind of soft Brexit to get through, and that would split the Conservative Party, that there would then be a general election later on in the summer. We would likely win. He would like to support that and help with that. And, I think history proves him right.
But when he was coming out with this, what was going through your mind? I mean, you must have thought, what on earth is he doing?
It seemed quite logical to me, actually, because he seems motivated by, one, wanting to get Brexit done, and that was a way to do it, and two, a pathological hatred of the Conservative Party, and this would help the Conservative Party split. So it seemed logical. And
when you told Jeremy all about this, what was his reaction?
Yeah, it didn't go very far from that point onwards. I mean, honestly, I was attracted by the idea because I thought that having voted to leave the EU, we should leave the EU. I thought leaving in a less destructive way than we have would be better, and it would mean that we were odds on to win the next election, and it would cause huge damage with the Conservative Party. The outcome would have been better, of course, for us, but I think for the country, because we would have had a Labour government, we would have had a better version of Brexit, and the world would be a slightly different place.
Apparently Dominic Cummings has endorsed reform for the local election.
The idea, I suppose, this does show he does have this pathological hatred for the party that he worked for, the number 10 he worked for. It's a bizarre... Cummings is clearly an intelligent man, but I don't think he's nearly quite as intelligent as he thinks he is. He is, like many people, very bright, very able, but not quite as bright and able as he assumes.
Right, let's go to a WhatsApp question from Imran in Reading. How should our government react to Donald Trump's despicable AI video about Trump Gaza that he posted on his own Truth Social platform today? I watched a bit of this video earlier on, and it is quite astonishing. So sort of every building in Gaza would be named after Donald Trump. There were sort of semi-naked male dancers on it, which I'm not sure that Donald Trump would that really appeal to him. James, I mean, this obviously wasn't a Trump-inspired video, but he has posted it on his social media.
So, responding to the question, the government should, of course, ignore the video itself. It's designed to drive us all completely balmy, and I think if what was asked AI is what would drive people the most deranged but in one video, and it's very impressive. That AI is beating DeepSeek. But I think really what our government should be doing is standing up not against the video, but against the policy. The idea that 2 million people in Gaza can be ethnically cleansed and displaced somewhere else to build some Trump fantasy land is unbelievably disgusting and should offend every single fibre in our collective being, and it should be stood up against by Keir Starmer tomorrow.
His logic, I think, if I understand it correctly, is that, well, nobody else is doing anything. Sort of Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, they're not coming in to try and make suggestions as to what should happen to Gaza afterwards. So you could argue that this is just a clever ruse to try and get countries in the Middle East to actually play their proper role.
I think threatening 2 million people who have just faced the most horrific destruction, people whose entire families have been destroyed, every building basically in Gaza razed to rubble, no schools, no hospitals, mosques flattened, to threaten them with never going back to their own land, not being able to rebuild it as a negotiating strategy is absolutely sick, okay. and we should call it out as exactly that.
Robbie.
President Trump is incredibly clever at getting attention, and we've seen that I think we're on our third question, which is focused on President Trump, and here we are now.
We're playing into his hands, aren't we?
And here we are talking about a video which which I watched, and I looked at it and thought, well, crikey, has this actually been shared from President Trump's social media platform? And that was the first question that went through my mind after being horrified at all of the scenes that I was seeing with different individuals running around drinking whatever they were drinking. So it was just, but I think the point is that whether this was generated by the Trump presidency or not, it has been shared by President Trump's social media platform. And I think actually probably quite cleverly done from his intention on getting people to be talking about this. And therefore, as a mechanism of effectively illustrating that those Arab states that have been talking about this have not come up with a collective solution yet, which seems to get Gaza into a position of absolutely having an end goal. And therefore, almost this needs to be treated, I think, quite seriously as effectively a warning shot, so to speak, that, a clear marker has now been put down by President Trump that effectively, if the Arab states do not come up with a collective solution, that Trump will continue down the position that he has already indicated of trying to seek a solution that I don't think is the best in interests of what the Palestinians will want to get to.
Yuan.
I think our government has been very clear on this, that displaced Palestinians have a right of return to their land, that they're refugees. And that's why it's so important, for example, that the UK government's increased our funding for UNRWA, because UNRWA is a refugee agency. And the term refugee in that title is a really important status. It's a legal status that means the right of return to that land. And I think James is right. We should not be focused on this video. I haven't actually watched the video. I think we should
do
be
yourself a favour. It's quite something.
I think we should look away from distractions that are not right, the debate of distractions. We should be focused on the terms of the current phase of the peace deal, on making sure that international eyes and the media are looking at the compliance on all sides with phase one of the peace deal, that we can move to the next phase of the deal. I've spoken to a number of Labour MPs who visited the West Bank over the last few recesses. I look forward to visiting myself, hopefully, in the next recess. I think we should be focused on tangible cooperation and solidarity and support for displaced Palestinians rather than being distracted by AI videos.
Well, I want to go and present this programme from Israel and the West Bank, but I might have barriers put in my way on that one. Gawain.
A quick response. I do not think we should be increasing funding to UNRWA. I think the fact that UNRWA has been so badly involved in the Hamas side of things, I think is out of order completely. But going back to the basic point, the video's absurd. Fine. Ignore. The policy of trying and thinking as though we need to do something about Gaza, actually, as you say, it's basically a pile of rubble. It's a pile of rubble with 2 million people living in it. If you're going to rebuild, actually, to a certain extent, you need to clear the rubble. The people have to move while you do the rebuild. And there should be a right to return. There should be a right to return, but having a vision. It's like Beirut in the 70s. Beautiful. If you look at films of Gaza, even before October the 7th, it's lovely. It's lovely, and that has been destroyed because Hamas launched a psychotic, murderous pogrom against the Jews.
Here's an idea, just throwing it out there. The BBC could make a documentary about it.
Yes, correct.
I mean, what could possibly go wrong? It's 9:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Gawain, Towler, Yuan, Robbie Moore and James Schneider with us answering your questions. Abigail is in Dewsbury. Good evening.
Hiya, I want to ask a question. Given the fact that BP today has announced they're not going to give as much money towards their towards their renewables, and they're going to put more money and more work into fossil fuel production, can I ask a question then? My question is, we were told that the reason why we can't do windfall taxes on these energy companies was because they're going to invest into renewables. Well, I'll tell you what, if they're not going to invest in renewables and they're going to put money into their shareholders and make profit, you can put a windfall tax on them. So I want all the panel now to ask why they can't have windfall taxes if they're going to not do what we want them to do and invest in energy, in clean energy. If they don't want to do that, they should pay the windfall tax.
Abigail, thank you very much. Well, BP has said it's cutting its spending on green targets by more than $5 billion and instead spending an extra $10 billion on oil and gas production. And this comes as the UK's Climate Change Committee calls on the public to make major lifestyle changes over the next 15 years in order to make achieving net zero carbon by 2050, including reducing the amount of meat we eat and shifting from having gas boilers in our homes to heat pumps. James Schneider, I imagine you have some sympathy with Abigail's argument.
Yes, I completely agree with Abigail. I think she's absolutely right. I think that we have huge subsidies globally for fossil fuels. The IMF, eco-socialist organisation, estimated that the global subsidy to fossil fuels is £6 trillion a year. Now, that's not just Britain, that's the whole world, but Britain does that as well. And that should, frankly, be reversed, and we need to stop subsidising fossil fuels, which we know we have to phase out from, and instead build rapidly the new green infrastructure that we need for our energy future.
Gawain?
Not surprising, I'm going to have the complete opposite view. I think that I suspect the reason why BP's done this is because in America, net zero is dead. And it is going to be that, just to the end of that in America, is going to roll out across the rest of the world. I think that what we are doing as a country is it's committing economic harry-kiri. Not investing in fossil fuels in this country is it's so destructive. We are exporting jobs, but we're not stopping climate change because we still need the products that we would have been making here. So, and they have to be transported much further distances. So it seems to be, it's a virtue signal, but it has no benefits for this country whatsoever.
Okay, Yuan, yeah.
No, I mean, I completely disagree with what Gawain just said. If we're thinking about investing in the future, it's also about future-proofing us in the case where all of our European partners are making the green transition, where all our major trading partners in East Asia across the world are making that green transition. In the future, goods that have a high embedded carbon content will not be able to export them into other markets without a hefty carbon tariff on those goods. And I think that is the reality of the green transition globally. And to go back to Abigail's original question about the windfall taxes, I think it's right that oil and gas companies pay their windfall taxes. I think it's right that the government extended and increased the windfall taxes because of the very high profits that energy companies have had over the last few years. So I think, yes, I think she does have a very good point in that question. Those giants should be paying those taxes.
Robbie?
Well, future-proofing to me is absolutely about making sure, yes, we're having a sensible conversation about the green agenda, but I'm yet to see, particularly when we've had the moratorium removed on onshore wind, where there is a proper sensible conversation around actually the benefits associated with making sure that those projects that happen or are likely to happen now are properly carbon neutral in themselves, which I have not seen any illustration of that, particularly one which is literally just happening on the outskirts of my constituency. 65 wind turbines are likely to take place on some of the most protected peatland in this country. And I would also say that where we are going, or seem to be going in the direction of the net zero agenda, is effectively offsetting our environmental responsibilities and mitigating that responsibilities to abroad, rather than having a sensible conversation around where can we be utilising gas reserves in this country, if necessary, where we can have control of those environmental impacts, and we can have make sure that that those job opportunities are in this country, not just simply importing that resource from elsewhere and allowing other countries to have those jobs created in countries abroad.
If we want to wean ourselves off Russian gas, going back to the earlier topics we discussed, if we want to be energy secure
we use
in
Norwegian
domestic
gas,
energy,
we don't use Russian gas.
Then we need to have a solution which is in the UK at scale going to be the onshore and offshore wind. It's going to be solar. It's going to be a bit of hydro.
It can't just be that.
It's going to be
surely any government has got to have a basket of energy sources and not just put everything in one basket.
Well, I just gave you a basket of different renewables, of wind, solar, of nuclear, which the government is now approving new projects for to move at scale. And that's a very firm and reliable source of power. And yes, we're in a transition period where right now we do use oil and gas, but that's a transition period. And I think if we start making that the bedrock, that we'll see ourselves being lost in the past very, very quickly.
And just very quickly, James would like to see a windfall tax on energy companies or an increased one. What about you? Wouldn't, I imagine, Gawain?
Nope.
You wouldn't, I imagine, Robbie?
I mean, I very much support our existing windfall tax that we've extended. I think that's right, and I think that oil and gas giants should not be trying to get out of it.
Right. Robbie in Chelmsford says, in Britain, the gap between the richest and poorest grows. We face stark generational inequality, and our bills go up and up each year. Where on earth is the British left? James Schneider, you are the British left. He's here.
For the purposes of this panel. So we were defeated in 2019. And I think that Robbie is completely right that the country needs a big progressive movement that can take on the richest and most powerful in the country on the side of ordinary people. The Labour Party is obviously not doing that in the slightest. And I think there is a big opening, and I think there is a chance for new progressive politics to take shape, because
which you've indeed written a book about.
Which indeed, thank you very much. Which indeed I've written a book about called Our Block, How We Win. And Robbie is right. Without having a powerful force which is focusing on the hoarded wealth and power of the very rich and putting that back into the hands of ordinary people, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yuan?
I obviously disagree with what James just said. When I speak to voters every week, when I knock on doors in Earley and Woodley, when I speak to students at the University of Reading, I talk about the Employment Rights Bill. I talk about the biggest increase in workers' rights in generations. For those young students, it's the increase in the minimum wage for those under 21s that is really affecting them as well. That's one of the most popular policies, I would say, that our government has brought for that age group. And we also talk about housing and the need to build housing so that the typical under 35-year-old is no longer living at home with their parents, which is what is happening right now.
Do you genuinely
and all those different points, people understand, because they understand that it's in their interest. It's in the interest not just of the young people that I mentioned, but for people by and large across the country who've been left behind by the pandemic, have been left behind by the last 14 years of austerity. It is right that we back workers' rights, we back higher minimum wages, and we back investment in infrastructure, particularly in housing.
Do you genuinely believe that the current package of policies the government has is going to reduce the inequality that we see in the country that Robbie refers to in his question? Do you really think, as a policy expert that you are, do you honestly think that it's going to do that? Will you bet money that with these policies followed through, in 3 years' time, the gap between the richest and the poorest in this country will be narrower?
James, I'm betting more than money on this. I'm betting every day of my life working for my constituents and working in Parliament and in the constituency on this. So I think that's much more valuable than any wager. And of course I do, because everything that I just explained will make things better off for those people I'm speaking to in Earley and Woodley.
What's the one thing that you would like to see the government do that they're not doing?
I haven't thought about this.
Well, I mean, okay, it's a new constituency, but the two Reading seats used to be Conservative seats, and I mean, your seat presumably, I don't know what's your majority.
My majority in my seat is under 1,000.
Well, you see, if I was in, I mean, Robbie, you've been through this. You were in a very marginal seat, and somehow you held off the Reform tide at the last election.
We didn't have a Reform candidate. They didn't bother with our constituency.
Is that right? Well, I bet they do next time. But in order to retain your seat, you've got to have this government deliver on the things that Robbie and James are talking about, haven't you? And there must be things that you would like to see done that maybe they're not doing, or things that they have done that you might think they shouldn't.
Well, I mean, the really obvious thing, and I think this stands for many different MPs, is that I would like to have seen a new hospital in Reading sooner than 2037. We know that the previous government handed us a new hospital programme that did not have funding against new hospitals that they were trying to promise. That's probably the one thing that I would say is if we could step on that gas and accelerate that. And I think myself and the other two Reading MPs are still campaigning to make sure that we can get that as soon as possible. Very
briefly from the two of you, because I've let the left battle it about amongst themselves. Gawain.
Yes, I think it's actually a very fair question. Where is the left at present? And it does seem to have the left has vacated the room. Yes, you've got Starmer, who is, I think, much more left-wing than people realise, but it's not there. And I think what is not mentioned has not been mentioned in this, and of course it's going to be me mentioning it, isn't it? You talk about housing. You've got to engage in the migration question. You can't have 1 million people arriving in the country in a year without having a serious impact. The fact is, GDP per person is dropping across the board. And okay, you tax the rich, so they run away because they can, and they leave. That's not going to... The only way you're going to improve the inequalities of income is that getting rid of the rich altogether. Well, that's not a good idea when you want economies to work.
OK. Robbie.
Well, Ian, you kindly touched on my constituency being incredibly marginal, which it always, I suspect, will be. But the nature of the conversations that I'm having on the door is those incredibly damaging implications of the budget, which is going to impact all of those individuals that are wanting to get into the job market. Employers' national insurance is impacting the business environment with the minimum wage increasing, with business rates now increasing. These are very family-based businesses that are employing those young people that want to be able to add to the local economy. So I am fearful that the budgetary changes are not going to be helping many of those constituents that the government claims that it will do.
Right, time for a fun question from Claire in Taunton. Former James Bond actor Timothy Dalton says the sale of the franchise by the Broccoli family to Amazon is sad, and he insists that anyone who plays 007 in future must be British. But who should do it next? James, you've got the look of a 007.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Well, if not me, then perhaps Idris Elba.
Idris Elba, yeah, he's been mentioned.
Although we've had this question for about 10 years, and it's always been, it's going to be Idris Elba, but maybe he's going to age out and it will have to be someone else.
Do you agree that it has to be British?
Probably should be British, yeah.
Yeah, I think it has to be British. Henry Cavill?
Who?
Henry Cavill.
Superman.
No clue. Is he?
No. I've not seen the film, but I know he exists.
I've seen pictures of him.
Yeah, there you go, that'll do.
Someone on a text is likening you to a young Christopher Reeve.
Well, could he be...
Not an old one, thank goodness.
Yeah, there we go. He could have been... No, he's not British. It's going to have to be me then.
Out. Yuan.
I'm obviously definitely out of the running, but I did like Jodie Comer in Killing Eve. I would say the most famous actor in my constituency, although he doesn't quite fit this bill, is George Clooney, although I've not yet seen him at any of my constituency coffee mornings.
George, if you're listening...
Come along.
You know you want to.
We'll fast-track citizenship for him.
I would say... having watched the second version of Gladiator that came out not too long ago, I reckon, and I've completely forgotten the name of the actor who plays the
don't look
Gladiator.
at me.
The chap that plays the Gladiator in the second one, it seems, I suspect,
but not Russell Crowe.
Not Russell Crowe, but in the one after that.
Who plays the Emperor?
Corey, who did you say? Paul Mescal. He was in that Irish thing, wasn't he? Normal people.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Ian Murphy.
Right, thank you very much for all of that, and thank you for joining us this evening. Sorry, I've gone all unnecessary about the mention of Paul Mescal. On Monday's panel, former Conservative Chief Whip Simon Hart, he's got a new book out, you might have seen serialised. The former Sunday Mirror and Sunday Express editor Eve Pollard, the Sunday Telegraph columnist Zoe Strimple, and the Labour MP Will Stone. So that's on Monday's panel. Coming up in the next hour, I want to know why you think kids have gone off reading. According to new surveys, they have. And the government has been urged to include audiobooks in the new school's curriculum in England after research showed that fewer children were reading books for pleasure and more were listening to them instead. I think this is really interesting. More than 2 in 5 of the 37,000 children and young people aged between 8 and 18 in the UK who took part in the poll said they enjoyed listening to audio in their free time in 2024, up from 39.4% in 2023. Only 28% of boys enjoy reading. How can that be corrected?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.